very warm welcome to our post-election panel discussion on energy policy. It's a great pleasure to do this together, BIE and UKERC today. I'm Volker Beckers. I'm the president of the BIE, and I'm delighted to be your host this morning. Let me start with saying, what a week. Just about a week ago, when the general election took place, 24 hours later, Sir Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister, accepted. Let me also remind you of our 40th anniversary. So BIE is celebrating its 30th birthday this year, and as an industry institute and a membership organization, it lives with the members and those people who are participating in dialogue with us.
Thank you, Volker. A real pleasure to be here. And so I'm going to have a couple of points I'd like to make to hopefully spark the discussion and spark some thinking. The first is and speak to the global trends that we see emerging, which will be relevant to the UK and how the UK positions itself in the context of the energy transition. The first is fragmentation. So I think we are seeing a trend towards increasing fragmentation and a slowdown of globalization. And this is a trend that's been going on for a while now, for many years. But what we've seen following Russia's invasion of Ukraine is that energy now has become front and center in terms of energy security and affordability, becoming sort of rising up the priority of governments across the world, alongside, I would say, a decarbonization agenda. So we're seeing more and more countries focusing on their national and domestic self-interests. And in that context, energy is also a key dimension, if you like, of that self-interest, and ensuring secure and affordable supplies of energy is important, has increased in importance. Now at Shell, of course, we do long-term scenarios, well known for that. And our latest scenarios actually sort of plot out what this new reality, if you like, means for the energy transition. And what's interesting is we find that it does, in some ways, this sort of fragmentation and increasing competition between countries could actually accelerate the energy transition to low carbon. But the nature of competition between countries is really important in terms of delivering that outcome. So competition can drive innovation, but it needs to be competition in terms of producing the lowest carbon and the best and the lowest cost. Sort of low carbon goods, services, solutions. So I think that kind of competition between countries actually sparks and accelerates the progress towards low carbon and towards net zero emissions. But on the other hand, if you have the nature of competition evolving in ways that are more protectionist, which limit where either inputs that are needed for the energy transition come from, or where the outputs of these low carbon goods, service, solutions flow to, that actually slows the energy transition and makes it more expensive. So again, the nature of competition and in this context, the nature of industrial policies that governments adopt become really important, not just in driving the pace of transition globally, but also in making sure that that transition is beneficial to domestic economies. So again, it's something for the UK also to think about, particularly given that the UK is a very globally integrated country, which depends on both imports and free flow imports and exports of goods. So again, thinking through industrial policies that avoid that protectionist lens, but still provide that support to innovation and low carbon industry is sort of a key element. Now, the second point I'd make is that we all know that the transition to low carbon will require substantial investments. And this is investment not just in the low carbon energy supply, but also in transforming demand across the economy, and also in putting in place the infrastructure that's needed to support that transition. And again, I think the consensus is that it will require trillions of dollars per year, sustained over the course of many years, including this decade and well into the next decade. Now, against this backdrop, and the UK is not unique in this, is the fact that governments have come out of the pandemic and the cost of living crisis with pretty high levels of debt and strained finances, public finances. So again, here the challenge to the UK and to any government would be, how do you think innovatively about maximizing the value for money from relatively scarce public money and funding, and in a way that sort of maximizes the crowding in of private investment. So what kind of policies do you need to look at that can minimize the pressure on government finances while crowding in that private investment? I mean, you have experience from all across the world on things that reduce the cost of capital for these projects. You have credit guarantee schemes, public-private partnerships. You also another type of interventions around carbon pricing, fiscal incentives that make the business case, if you like, for many of these investments. And not to forget the removing and reducing regulatory barriers, like we've heard around grid connections, around planning in the electricity system also help. Now, I would just say that UK is well positioned in this context. It has the Climate Change Act, which sets a legal framework for decarbonization and provides policy certainty. It's got a carbon budgets process that provides governance for systematically moving towards those targets. So I think building on that and putting in place a policy framework that's cost effective and efficient, we can make UK a very attractive destination for these investments.
My role is just to talk through some of when we were planning this, what were manifesto pledges, and have now become the challenges that the new government is setting out its plans around, and in particular the mission that they set out in their manifesto to make the UK a clean energy superpower. And there's a number of sub components to that, and I'll make a few comments on each of those. And as director of UKERC, I'm avowedly apolitical. However, I think the energy with which they've pursued post-election this very, very ambitious agenda makes this a very exciting time for all of us working in energy. This is clearly a change agenda, and many opportunities to input to that. So they've appointed Chris Stark, very well known to all of us, former CEO of the Climate Change Committee, and has had now a brief tenure as the Carbon Trust boss, and is now the mission controller. MC Chris, I have already teased him about that. Responsible for delivering the 2030 decarbonisation challenge, which we all know is a hugely ambitious aspiration. So that's electricity. How that's defined is very important. We might come back to that. But the aspiration is a 2030 electricity decarbonisation challenge. Let's not forget that beyond 2030, there's a huge amount more to do, because beyond 2030 is when we will see much more of the electrification of heat and transport. And therefore, we will need to not just decarbonise our existing power grid, which is the current aspiration, but to then extend and expand, perhaps double or more the size of our electricity production, to electrify those sectors that we currently provide energy, but the 2/3 of final energy that we get from burning stuff in our cars and in our boilers. So that's a very, very big deal. Next thing is to set up Great British Energy, a new publicly owned company to play an active role in the energy market that's modelled on the publicly owned companies in some other countries. Less money than was promised 2 or 3 years ago. The 28 billion is no longer available for GB Energy. But I'm interested to see the role that will play. They're talking about community energy. I'm also interested to see the role it will play in driving innovation, for example, floating wind. A promise around warm homes and insulation, something that governments have not been able to get right in this country since for at least a decade. Progress was being made prior to that, and I would emphasise that the UK was doing quite well on rolling out insulation until around about 2012. Reform the market so it works for consumers. This is not about REMA, the review of electricity markets. I'm sure we'll get a question about that. It's more about fairness and standing charges and social tariffs and so on. A plan for green jobs, but also for a North Sea transition, where we will be losing jobs as that basin depletes and as we don't issue new licenses. And finally, to become a global climate leader again. And that's certainly a role in which the new Secretary of State, Ed Miliband, has a great deal of experience. And we need to be making progress on the domestic agenda to deliver credibly on that global aspiration.
I wanted to talk about three things in the context of the new government. I want to talk about a change in narrative or tone. I want to talk about the change in objectives, and I want to talk about the change in approach. Those three things strike me as three really important, absolutely interlocking things that we as economists, as analysts, as commentators and thinkers working in this space need to really have at the front of our mind. On that first one of narrative, and this is where I think it's really important to contextualize that clean power mission, that clean energy mission, in the context of the other missions as well. So we've got 5 missions. The second is energy. The first is growth, of course. Growth, investment, jobs, absolutely seen as critical. And very interesting to me that it was the Chancellor, not the Energy Secretary, that announced the lifting of the onshore wind ban, when that was one of the first actions that we saw from the government. And so we're looking, it looks like we are going to see increasingly this shift from clean power, clean energy being seen as a climate objective to it being seen as a climate and economic growth, a bills, a security objective, that widening of objectives that I think we'd all started to feel with the gas price crisis, with the Ukraine crisis, with the series of events that happened, and just the shift from the old language of the trilemma into a new world where actually there was a coalescing of these things with cheap, homegrown, renewable energy as an option that was able to tick multiple boxes rather than the conflict. And as someone who's, for the 15 years I was at the Climate Change Committee, this was a constant battle as to kind of get that narrative right, that there was a pro-growth story here, not just that this was a constant conflict of climate action and economic growth. So I think that shift in narrative is a good thing to see. I hope that it lays the ground for a less politicized debate around net zero. We'll see. But it's something I think we all need to bear in mind when we're considering what's happening. The second, then, the shift in goal, and Rob has said, we now have this clear goal of clean power 2030. I say clear, the goal is quite clearly stated, but what it exactly means is maybe yet to be defined a little bit. And those definitions, I think, again, as analysts working in this space, we're probably familiar that those detailed definitions, is net zero greenhouse gases, is it carbon dioxide, does it allow trading of credits, etc. These detailed definitions can really matter, actually, and we'll have a similar set of things to unpick, I think, around clean power. Is this about hitting an exact amount of gas that can be on the system? Is it about how does it interplay with exports, when we expect the UK to shift to being a net exporter when we have a clean power system? How does it interplay with that strategic reserve that's been promised? So I think there's some interesting definition questions that we'll need to unpick fairly quickly so that we can kind of use that goal in the way it's intended to really give a sense of direction and a clear map as to what we're trying to achieve. We need to know what it actually means to get there. But the main thing I wanted to say is that is clearly a very, very stretching goal. It is clearly sending a message of pace and of action and of a desire to smash through barriers that are there. At the same time, it is not necessarily that much more ambitious and that much more requiring of things to be done than a lot of the targets that we had already. So if you look at the CCC scenarios that were published last year on the way to a fully decarbonised power sector in 2035, those saw fossil fuel use for power generation going down from around a third today, a third in 2023, down to 2% just in 2035. Now, there's a temptation to say, oh gosh, but we've moved 2035 to 2030, so we've doubled the pace of change. Well, actually, those same scenarios got that share down to 4% in 2030. So a lot of the work was already being done to 2030. So this isn't maybe as big as a shift as it looks like, and the kind of nameplate of the target. And I don't mean by that to understate at all what it requires, because to get to those CCC scenarios, you have to hit all these targets that are there already, including the 50 gigawatts of offshore wind. We know that's very, 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 very challenging, particularly after the auction results last time. It requires you to have a big chunk of gas CCS and of hydrogen for power, providing around 10% of generation in 2030, right? That is clearly a long way from where we are today. That's going to be a massive shift to do it. But we're not necessarily actually moving the goalposts as much as it looks like we are on the face of it. Big challenge to get back on track to the goal that was already there, but and we need to do a bit more at the edge, but this isn't maybe as fundamental as it looks kind of at first glance. And that, I think, is important in us finding a sensible landing zone that is at the absolute edge of what can plausibly be delivered, but not beyond it. So then the third one is the mission-led approach. And maybe in many ways, this is the most interesting, because I think many of us that have been working on this challenge for a long time have been saying for a long time, it's all about delivery. It's about getting things done. And the new approach is clearly intended to focus on delivery and focus on breaking things down and getting things done. The mission control, as Rob has said, is a really interesting part of that. Have to see how that plays out. But I think that idea that it's much more of a partnership way of working, that we are finding and then immediately unpicking barriers to get things done, feels like the type of approach that could work if it is well executed. And I think particularly that aggressive unblocking in the context of power, where we know there's a huge amount of infrastructure to build, both the generating capacity and the grid to connect it all, some really big operability challenges that will need to be overcome as well, new technologies that need to be rolled out, etc. You know, it's going to be tough, and there are going to be a lot of things that need to be broken through. And then I'll close just with a kind of caveat, which is it's not just about electricity. As Rob has said, 2/3 of energy is for other stuff. Electricity is only 15% of UK emissions, right? It cannot be a story just of electricity. It cannot be a story just of 2030. It has to cover the other stuff as well. And again, let's see how things play out on that.
Great, Mike. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, very interesting perspectives. Let me start with you, if I may, Mike. I think you just came to this, and I don't know where I pick up this this phrase. Let's move from making policies to implementing them. And I know you just talked about the mission-led approach as a crucial element of this. How do you see the process changing from making policies to implementing them?
Well, I think, as you say, that is something that lots of us have wanted to see for a long time. The mission control, as Rob says, is very open to teasing. It's sort of easy to make fun of the sort of the name there. But actually, I think as an analyst in the space, it's also really sort of interesting thing immediately, because it immediately made me think, right, what is that control center with the dashboard? What are all the pictures on the wall that you're going to be looking at, right? Well, you know, what transmission lines are up there? Which wind farms are up there? What are you tracking them for? And it's a really similar approach to how we did things at CCC when we were looking at how we would monitor carbon budgets. We take the big goal at the end, the carbon budget, break it down between sectors, and then within those sectors, you break down, well, what investments need to happen, what needs to happen to get to those investments, getting through planning, getting final investment decisions, getting it built, et cetera, et cetera. And then back it down to a dashboard of things that you can track bit by bit. Now, CCC is too small an organization to be able to do that to the level of detail that is needed for delivery. But a government that is well equipped and is working absolutely in tandem, close coordination with the private sector to kind of mobilize an entire industry and focus on this and really quickly get to the point of, hang on, this isn't happening. Why has this not gone through planning yet? What can we do to unblock it? What can we do to make it happen? It feels like an approach that done well could work and could do things quicker than the approaches we've tended to have so far. We need to be wary of the kind of over planning, over kind of centralizing, but we are already moving. We know we have to move in this system to more strategic planning than we've had, at the same time as keeping a role for markets. And I think getting that bit right is going to be interesting. It's something we said we're going to talk about more in the BIE conference in September. But that kind of that question is going to be a really interesting one.
At the moment, we don't have enough detail on how they envisage that this mission controller role will fit together with the new entities that you've just mentioned and the pre-existing ones. For example, Mike's organisation. So we've already seen significant institutional change with the separation of ownership and operation in National Grid, creation of National Grid ESO, then moving to NESO. NESO being given a particular set of responsibilities, reporting to Ofgem and to the government, and the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan. We have made a very significant pivot to planning. To a large extent, the old argument about planning versus markets needs to be recast and recognise that the pivot to planning has been made. I know I made fun of MC Chris Stark and mission control, and I do imagine him like Captain Kirk sitting in a big chair with some buttons. However, I welcome the clarity of purpose, and what I would interpret that as meaning, the creation of that is that DESNZ, the government, the Secretary of State, will be in charge of this process, because I feared previously there was a lack of clarity over who was in charge. I'm not super keen on endless proliferation of entities. I think there's a risk there, but I'm certainly pleased that we have some clarity of purpose and over who is reporting to whom, who is ultimately responsible.
I mean, I think to the question of is it feasible, I think the question we should be asking at the moment is how do we make it feasible? And I think we have to kind of go through that, recognizing there's been a shift here to say, look, we are prepared to get stuck in and remove barriers that previously are barriers that people haven't been prepared to touch, whether that's on planning or whatever. So I think the question to start with is, what would it take to make it feasible? And I'm not going to pretend to have the answer to that at this point. It's something we're certainly in the ESO, NESO, when we become NESO, are going to be looking at pretty carefully, both from a systems perspective, connections, and the generations as well. The thing that worries me with my CCC hat is that this is great, that there's a mission and there's a clarity of purpose and that there's a signal of acceleration, and the worry is that it's too focused, because there are lots of things that have to be done to deliver the carbon budgets, the NDC, the net zero target. I think if you are going to focus on one thing, then electricity is the right one, because it allows you to actually pull in the electrification of transport, of heating, of industry. As you say, you've got to join that up with the industrial strategy points as well. So I think my hope is that this mission control, which will have to be really focused on clean power 2030 to start with, does open things out fairly quickly into those other areas, right? And that we get on with the things we know need to happen. We had a great report out last night from Nestor on heat policy, but it struck me that it was saying a lot of things that we were saying at CCC 3 years ago, right? Because we've known, and not just us, but others, right? Because we've known the set of solutions that need to happen for quite a while in terms of policy, but they haven't happened. So I think there are things we need to get on with in those other areas as well. So the concern for me is that what should be an expression of acceleration and intent that just pushes everyone to go faster everywhere becomes too narrow focusing and actually pushes out other stuff. I think it shouldn't be that. It should be seen as this is an intent, not just for 2030, but beyond, for an enduring clean power sector with an enduring contribution to decarbonisation of energy as a whole. But it ends up being too tight. So I think if you want to avoid that, putting the ex-head of the CCC in at the head of mission control is not a bad start. This is someone who obviously thinks across that piece in a similar way. So that's an interesting start.
I think we're seeing this rise of energy security and this rhetoric around energy independence across the world. And one of the things to point out is that that's one of the factors actually accelerating the energy transition in many parts of the world. And for example, shifting from, say, imported fossil fuels towards domestic, largely renewable resources is something that helps the decarbonization agenda, as well as meeting that energy security, domestic benefits to the economy, etc., those agendas. So I think we're seeing that as a driver, even though the trilemma is back, we're still seeing that driving the push towards investments in low carbon and to accelerate that. Now, in the UK context, I think, but that said, we would say that, even in the IEA's net zero roadmap, for example, there is still, the transition in the energy system takes time. I mean, this is a system that's been built up over decades, and sort of phasing it down while you're phasing up and ramping up your low carbon energy system is a complex, and it will take time, won't happen overnight. And the key there is, I think we are, as shall we see, a period of sort of volatility in energy markets globally, because you have energy supply suddenly getting tight because you're phasing down one system, you're phasing up a new system, and in that interim, even some minor disruptions, like we saw from Norway recently, will produce sort of disproportionate swings in prices. So I think so there is a need to ensure that there's adequate supplies of the oil and gas to manage that, even as the system decarbonizes. And that's not just true for UK, but for many countries across the world. In terms of the licensing round, I mean, the ways of thinking about the security of supply in that sense. I mean, the UK has a diversified range of imports that it imports from across the world, in terms of its oil and gas needs. So again, having a diversified source or supply of energy, of fossil fuels to meet demand is the crucial, really, in terms of delivering that security of supply to the extent, so it doesn't have to be UK production or exploration that delivers that. We have large global markets, liquid markets, which are fairly flexible and timely in terms of delivering supplies. So that could be the route for ensuring that security. And also, I think, if you look at the scale of potential UK production in the context of the global markets, it's pretty small. And so again, the price impacts are also likely to be fairly limited from that. So that's, so in that sense, I realize that there are political considerations around this, but there are many ways of delivering sort of that security of supply for the UK, even as it sort of transitions to net zero.